Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Vote Her In Live, our year-end review. So Vote Her In is a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and Rebecca Sive. And we've been going for, oh gosh, like a year and a half now. So I'm on here with Sophy, who's the other broad, and Rebecca. I'm going to turn it over now to Rebecca, who will talk us through what we're going to talk about this episode. So hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly, and hi, Sophie. It's a treat to be here. Yeah, waves to everybody, right? It's that time of the year. It's that time of the day. It's been about a year and a half, and it was prompted by Kelly inviting me to be on the show when my book, Vote Her In, was published. And we had this chat about, well, how can we keep talking about this issue? You all already were, but in particular, how could we talk about electing a woman president? And of course, in this last year and a half, we watched, 4 amazing women run for the presidency. One of them was selected as the vice presidential candidate. We're going to talk about that a little bit, but on many fronts, and we've learned a lot about this over the course of the year from a lot of different women that Kelly and Sophie and I have spoken with. We voted her in, and it's a big year. And so we thought that for voters, but also for us. So we thought we should do this year-end review. We hope it'll give you food for thought. And what we're going to do is just talk through some questions and see where we go with this, and hopefully it'll give you food for thought. And just to set the context, I was thinking about, the issues that sort of frame the year, and no surprise to anyone, it's not like a hidden secret or anything like that. The first, of course, being that notwithstanding the fact that 4 highly qualified, more qualified than many of the men who have run for president in the last 200 years, couldn't get the nomination. And that's no small matter. We're not going to be able to dissect that today, but we need to understand that the ramifications of that. The second thing is that, the good news piece of it, which I alluded to, which is was the selection of Senator Harris. And I think if you'd asked anybody, even just a couple years ago, who's the first woman on a presidential ticket since Sherry Ferraro was on one in 1984, going to be a woman of color. And I don't think you could have imagined that. And so I think that's remarkable and wonderful. She's obviously highly qualified. The other thing on the federal level that I think is significant is the fact that, we're going to have more women in the House of Representatives than we ever had before. We're also going to have more Republican women, and a lot of them are quite conservative. They are not, at least in my view, feminists, right? They don't believe in a pro-choice agenda or equal pay and other things like that their colleagues have voted against. So that's a sort of mixed bag, I guess. And we need to kind of think about that, what that means, I think, for the women's agenda, the feminist agenda, equal opportunity for girls. And I guess the last thing I would mention here contextually is the fact that we didn't really make any significant headway on the election of women to executive office. There are some victories for women as mayors, but not as governors. And, the traditional route, which is going into a legislature, seems to be the way to go. But here we are in 2020, and, the Congress is a quarter women, right? And many state legislatures are doing well if there are that many women in them. So there's a sort of question here for us and for our listeners and people who study these things, as to whether the strategy we're following is the best one, or whether women can be encouraged to perhaps focus on executive positions at the start of their careers more than they have. So that's kind of a brief overview. I wanted to begin with asking Kelly, who I think has interviewed more people this year than at least more than Sophy and I have, and probably more than many. But on these voter-in episodes, I think we did, I don't know, 25 or 30 of them this year, mostly focused on this issue of electing a woman president, talking with a range of women, both elected, who run organizations, writers, historians. I wanted to ask Kelly to share with us her thoughts about sort of what she learned from those interviews about what she thinks it will take to elect a woman president, which I know is a dream of hers.
Yeah, has been a dream for a long time, right? So yeah, I was thinking through, what the people that I've talked to, the people we've talked to, what I've learned. A few themes I think come out. One is just being pragmatic. So I'm of course a very pragmatic person and always have been, but I see that in the women that we've talked to, the women who've been successful, is that they know that politics isn't like you come up with some great idea and you're going to push it through and that's it. They know that politics is about compromise, is about building relationships, is about taking a long time sometimes. I mean, look how long it's taken us in American history to get a woman vice president finally. And so I see that in these women, and that they don't let that pragmatic side sort of get them down. That it's like, okay, this is what we do, this is how we tackle it, and we keep going. And the keep going thing, I think, is important as well. It's this perseverance. So we talked to Carolyn Bordeaux, who was running in Georgia, in the Georgia 7th District. It's the only district in the entire country that hadn't been redistricted that flipped from Republican to Democrat in 2020. And Carolyn, I think she had run in 2018, had come really, really close, but hadn't won. And she picked up and ran again. Like as soon as that election was over, said, okay, let's do it again. Let's figure out what we learned and keep going. And, I think we see that in so many of the women. You see these women who have had these sort of long careers. They keep building. They start, Kamala Harris started as San Francisco DA, and then she was California DA, and then she's a senator, and then she's a vice president, and so these women who just stick with it. It's hard work. It's a lot that they're doing, but it's not about being splashy. It's about you get in there and you do the work. We saw the same with Lauren Underwood, who we've interviewed now a couple times. And, this is a swing district that a lot of these kind of districts in the country in 2020 went back to Republican control. Here she is, the youngest Black woman ever elected to Congress. And does she go in there and, join the squad and be splashy and get all over social media? No, she goes into Congress. She gets the job done. She works hard. She does bipartisan legislation, which nobody does anymore. And she goes back to her district and says, here's what I'm producing for you. And they love her and they reelect her. And so I think those are the kind of things that I saw over and over again in conversations. Is, I guess I just named inadvertently 3 Ps, the pragmatism and the perseverance. Did I have a third? Maybe I didn't have a third P. The nonpartisanship.
Policy orientation, right?
So, I think those are the things that I saw in women who have been successful, who have built organizations. And then the last thing I would point to is that all of these women that we talk to are people who are building up other women and other women's power and making sure that other women are also able to get in the arena. And, sort of the stereotype of a woman in power is that then she pushes away other women and stuff. And that is not the way things are. Maybe it never was, but it's certainly not the way things are now. That these women get into power and say, okay, who can I mentor? Who can I bring up with me? How can I build an organization that's going to get other women into power? And that is so vital to continuing this work and to getting a woman president, is that sort of sticking with it and bringing everyone up with you. And that's what Hillary Clinton did, right? Like Hillary Clinton didn't win, and she could have just been like, the world is terrible. And, she didn't. She did everything she could in 2020 to be like, no, now we elect Democrats. Now we elect women. And that, I think, is really meaningful.
Yeah. I would just add a sort of historical note here. I actually, in 1986, I guess it was the first organizer for Emily's List in Illinois. And actually the first state organizer, I think, anywhere, because my girlfriends were putting the organization together. And we had a cadre of people here. But I think you're right that from the very beginning at that time, I went to my girlfriends, my activist girlfriends, the national people went to their activist girlfriends and built this network of women. And not to say that there isn't competition, but that network and generational effort has held us in really good stead, certainly for this year, when the Emily Network, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars and activists and so on. So as we think about it, Sophie, of course, there's an issue about, learning from home, right? And for you, Wisconsin, and it couldn't be a more important state. Although some of us in Michigan who have a love for Michigan anyway would maybe argue with that. But it's just terrifically important. And I wondered what you would share with our listeners, what you observed, maybe from Republican women who ran as well as Democratic women, what you saw, what kind of lessons you would take and share with friends of yours who wanted to get involved.
So we actually had a number of women on our show who ended up running and winning in Wisconsin. We had Deb Andreka, who ran for State Assembly District 23 and was actually one of the few people to flip that district from an incumbent as well. And so she really focused on a lot of she had a really good campaign, and that she focused on three things. She kept saying, I want to make District 23 smarter, safer, and healthier. And then she would break down each of those. Smarter in terms of our gun sense laws, safer in terms of, what was the safer one? No, safer was that one. Smarter was in terms of education. She was a former teacher. And then healthier in terms of healthcare and the environment. And so she would go through those issues one by one. Every time she would campaign, she would bring up that slogan, and it was really effective. And Jill Karofsky, who was on episode, I think it was 339. She actually
ended up being a very important election.
It ended up being a very important election, and it was really interesting because that was the April election when, if you cast your mind back all the way back to April, even though it feels like a million years ago, the Wisconsin General Assembly tried to force an election when everybody wanted to not have an in-person election because of our spiking COVID rates. And they refused to make any sort of concession for that. And Jill Karofsky won against an independent, a conservative independent, who was a man who was already on the Supreme Court and who had actually won more votes than her in the primary election. There's a nonpartisan primary in Wisconsin, and he had won more votes than her and the other person. So it seemed pretty clear from looking at the data that actually a lot of people were angry about what they perceived as the corruption in the Wisconsin state government, that they would allow this election to go forward, intentionally trying to kill people, really. And they went and voted her in. And then we have, this wasn't 2020, but Tammy Baldwin is always an important lesson. In 2018, she won overwhelmingly. And if you look at the data, Tony Evers, who was the Democrat who won over Scott Walker for our gubernatorial race, he won by a pretty slim margin. So there was a significant number of people who were going into that voting booth and saying, yes, Scott Walker, check. Yes, Tammy Baldwin, check. So those people were really interesting to me. And so I think the trends that I noticed were, one, all of these people focused on what I think we would call kitchen table issues. They focused on healthcare, which is huge. They focused on education and education and infrastructure. I think a lot of people mistakenly think that the Midwest is like very libertarian, but it's really not. There's a really long and glorious tradition of real basic progressivism in the Midwest. And particularly in Wisconsin, we're really proud of our public education system. We're really proud of our public lands. And so there was a lot of that sort of economic populism and focusing on sort of getting back to progressive basics sort of. And I'd also say that there was a lot of focus for all three candidates on fairness. Deb Andrecka focused a lot of her campaign on fair maps and saying, we need to have a fairer electoral map in Wisconsin after redistricting. I will help with that. Jill Karofsky, her whole campaign was built around the idea that, yes, she is generally a progressive in her own political thoughts, but that she never makes a decision before she's actually heard the case. That she never will say, she would not say how she would rule in any case because she doesn't know what the merits are of the case until she sees it. And Tammy Baldwin was all about talking about, I don't like corruption. I want to, get out, get all of these career politicians out, there was a lot of emphasis from all the candidates on fairness and sort of like an anti-corruption spiel, which I think is something that would be really useful because I think studies do show that people tend to trust women as politicians more, like they overall tend to find them more trustworthy. And so I think that's something that we could all maybe really use to our advantage.
Yeah, I would, it occurs to me, wouldn't it be wonderful if we totally trusted everybody we, maybe had to vote for, right? Because those were the options. But the other thing that struck me while you were talking and while Kelly was talking is this issue of being practical and pragmatic. And I too think of myself that way. But I also think that this year showed us that idealism, hopes, and dreams are really, really powerful motivators. If you look at Kamala Harris, I mean, she inspired people, as I understand it from what I've read, from talking to people who are colleagues who worked in the presidential and so on. She inspired people, to work in a way that they may not have been inspired to work otherwise. Partially it was Black women, partially it was women generally, but her own personality sort of enabled them to feel that. And you could argue that some of the other candidates didn't have quite that sort of inspirational feel to them. Not less qualified, not less practical, but perhaps less inspirational. I also think I would just point out that I do think that while you were drawing, Kelly, the contrast between Lauren Underwood, who we all adore, and AOC, who at least I don't know personally, and the difference there, I do think that she, the role she plays as a really brilliant gadfly, right? Of putting issues out there like, a green world, right? Unlike the one we have today, and getting people like Ed Markey, who've been around forever, to actually, sign on. You can't, one would never want to discount a person who has that kind of power, which really isn't a practical power. It's an aspirational power. It's an idea, right?
Yeah. No, and I love AOC. I don't think it would work in a district like Lauren Underwood's, though. AOC has the benefit in being in a district where people love how progressive she is, and she can just sort of run with that. And so it's important that we have both, I think, in Congress.
Yeah. I think also that it kind of relates to the choices women get to make. We don't want to have the situation, at least I wouldn't want the situation, where only one type of woman can run, right? It's one of the wonderful things I think has happened is, here we have a Black woman married to a white man who is a stepmother. Yeah. I mean, this is an idea, a profile that could not have worked even a decade ago, right? So I want to then, I want to kind of turn to another issue, which is the fact that, you two are living witnesses, as are millions of other women, particularly young women, but not only, who were really incredibly mobilized by the Hillary Clinton campaign, certainly motivated and angered to then keep on fighting, right, after she lost. And I wanted, Kelly, to ask you, I mean, in 2016, a lot of people were then motivated to do more because of this horrible experience, this terrible loss.
Yeah.
But this year it's something different. This year we have this at that level. We have this amazing situation, which we've been discussing, of a woman being the vice president, about whom the president-elect has said she'll be the last voice and person in the room. And I'm wondering, as you've talked to perhaps colleagues, friends of yours, and Sophie, chime in too, please. Um, do you see this positive change as something that will equally motivate women who have not been previously active to be involved?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it, and I don't know that I think it will have that sort of immediate impact the way that Hillary Clinton losing did, where that was just sort of the rage. It's like you immediately have to jump in and do something. And I don't know that I think it will have that sort of impact.
Right.
In part because it's been blunted somewhat by this really long, drawn out, like I was super excited the night that she gave the speech accepting it. And then since then, they've been fighting the results, and it's, it's inevitable, but it's been drawn out and blunted somewhat. But I think the impact that it will have is in little girls today being able to spend their entire lives saying, yeah, of course a woman can be vice president. Of course a woman can be governor, senator, mayor. Like they see these women all over doing things that we didn't, even Sophie, who's a bit younger than I, didn't have that as kids. And so I think it will, when you get to 30 years from now, that you will see this definite huge impact, and that hopefully by that point women are half, if not more than half, of all elected officials. Have the problem you have in Paris where they have been fined because they have too many in the government. That's a great problem. Let's get to there. So I think it will definitely have that. I think that it's not just little tiny girls, although they will have the benefit of having grown up watching women run for president from the beginning. But I have talked to a lot of teenage girls in the past couple years, and those girls are just amazing, and they are bright, and they are committed, and they are passionate about politics. And so to have at this point in their lives that sky's the limit, go out there, and they are definitely, I think, going to run with that and be really inspired by that. I think a lot of the women of Sophie's generation, my generation, your generation, Rebecca, who are going to get involved in politics, are probably already in the past couple of years have gotten involved. I think where we might see a more immediate difference is in the rest of society sort of accepting, like, yes, women can be in power. This is not some weird thing. And that, the more women we have run for president, the more just sort of it's just a thing. It's no longer unique. You go from having, oh my gosh, a woman is the Democratic nominee, to having the next time, 6 women on a debate stage. And it just becomes more of a thing that we accept and don't sort of other as much. And they can be any kind of woman. They don't have to, fit into, like you were saying, they don't have to be a specific mold of this is what a woman running for president is like. And so I think that will have a more immediate effect. I don't know if you, either of you agree that we won't see as much. To me, it doesn't feel like there are women sort of jumping in going, I was never involved in politics, but now that Kamala is going to be VP, I'm going to be involved in politics. I think it continues to inspire. It doesn't necessarily sort of drive a new spark.
Sophie, just to add a related piece and ask you to respond to it. I think that women were giving in great amounts this year, which was obviously an indicator of great enthusiasm. So there's being an activist, there's writing letters, there's having podcasts, there's writing big checks. And that's been something significant on the part of women who have not done that before. So I don't know whether, Sophie, you've seen that, but certainly I have read about it. And Sophie, on this point, think about what would you say, is the impact, if any? So there's Kamala Harris, right? But then there's also Janet Yellen, the first Secretary of the Treasury this nation has ever had. A no-nonsense, talk about practical, talk about brilliant, talk about, going the distance. Jennifer Granholm, Deb Haaland, women who are going to be wielding enormous power in jobs that women have never had before. I'm wondering whether you think that's, along with Harris, any kind of a mobilizing factor or something like that.
I think I would agree with Kelly that in and of itself, it's not a mobilizing factor, but I think that it's important to remember that people who have been mobilized in 2016 need a win. People were mobilized in 2016 by Hillary Clinton's loss. But if you are constantly running on anger, you get to a point where you kind of want to give up, right? And I think 2018 was a really good moment for all of us because we got a whole bunch of women in Congress, and that was sort of a moment when we could all go, okay, like we set a goal and we met it. And now with 2020, we set a goal and we met it. And I think it's important for maintaining the movement long term, because I remember in early 2017, there was a lot of talk about, the Women's March happened, but does that have any kind of lasting impact? And I think seeing Kamala Harris elected and seeing women in Biden's cabinet will send a message to people who were mobilized that, hey, this is worth it. Keep going. I did just want to jump on Kelly's point too. I think it's also important for little boys to see Kamala Harris as the vice president. I think we see that a lot of women know that they're capable, and in many ways, it's sort of the patriarchy that holds us back. And I really like the fact that my son now thinks that politics is what women do. Because I'm involved in politics, so politics is what women are involved in politics. That's what women do. They're in the government and they're leading. And in his words, "Daddy, stay home and cook." So I think it's really exciting to have him see women at the very highest positions of power, and have that at 4 years old, have that memory embedded in his brain that tells him, women can do the same things that I can do.
Yeah, one thing I want to add to what the two of you have said is the idea that, it's frequently the case that, for instance, you have to run more than once before you win. We know that from looking at races over time. You have to fight. We still don't have an equal rights amendment after fighting for that for however many decades. So one of the things that I think is really important here, I do want to close on a note, but I want to just say that I think that we can't, you need a win to keep going, right? I think you're absolutely right about that, Sophie. But it's also true that you need to maintain a level of, I don't know if anger is the right word, it's not rage, but you certainly need to maintain a level of this isn't right.
Determination, maybe.
Well, and it's be determined, and also that this isn't just, right? Mm-hmm. That it's not just that notwithstanding all the successes, the overall profile is a fairly modest one, right? Mm-hmm. Notwithstanding all the successes, the consensus was to go back to an older white man to be president. Not disparaging Joe Biden in any way, but the facts are as they are in front of us. So I guess I want to just say, to supplement what you all are saying, that as we look ahead and as we keep talking here and elsewhere, that I hope that everyone will maintain that sense of determination and that commitment to fight for justice, even if the wins don't come as frequently as we would have them come, right? And on that note, I just wanted to give our listeners to Voter In, because we're with you every couple of weeks, Kelly and I, just a quick preview of what we think I hope will happen over the next few months. I want to continue with you, and I hope you all have found it interesting, the conversations we've been having with women artists who are political. I think that's really important. It may be a little bit of a niche for some people. It's not a celebrity-focused event, but I hope that those of you who listen to Vote Her In and to Two Broads generally will appreciate why those women are such great value to us. Also want to hopefully take a pretty careful look at the kind of policy agenda that the Biden-Harris administration will deploy, probably in a very difficult legislative situation, and what role the women will play in that, a variety of women, obviously. And perhaps also, I hope that we will again talk to some really thoughtful and brilliant writers, because those women give us a kind of ability to think, or food for thought that we so need. So that's just a little glimmer. In the meantime, I want to just again say to Kelly and Sophie, it's been great fun to do this with you. I think that as an organizer, as a lapsed professor, as a writer, it's just a great treat to be able to join with you and share with other women activists. So a happy New Year to all. Sophie and Kelly, you want to say some parting?
Yeah, just good riddance to 2020, I think. It's been obviously a terrible year in a lot of ways, although we do have these bright spots, right? Like the Kamala Harris election is this really bright spot to look back on from 2020. But, I think obviously things don't magically get better when Biden and Harris are in office. Things don't magically get better when it's 2021 instead of 2020. But I think we're on what feels like an upswing. And I'm very hopeful and looking forward to this year ahead.
It has to be an upswing, right? Like there's nowhere to go.
I hope.
Yeah, it's kind of right. Who couldn't have imagined it, right? But thank goodness for perseverance, for the internet, for the ability to communicate with others who care, with our families. So the best to all, and to all, good night, right?
Yes, indeed. All right. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.